Just a second, I'm gonna publish the... Okay.
Okay.
The microphone. So let's start. Okay. Hi everybody. We are here with Silvia Franceschini. She's an independent curator and researcher in contemporary art and architecture, and her practice deals with the political intersection of education, history, and institution making within research and base art and design practice. And there now we're starting from her forthcoming book, Global Tools When Education Will Coincide with Life. We will talk about design, radical pedagogies, and the schooling. So, hi Silvia.
Hi, hello everybody. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
And
thank you for accepting.
Yeah. And let's start with the first question. So, Global Tools was a counter school, a place for dialogues, new tales, and independent production, organized by Archizoom, Super Studio 999, Ziggurat, and many others at the beginning of the 70s. The first question is, why a school? And a school for who? A school counter what? And what were their methods and their main themes?
Okay, good. So I will give a brief introduction about Global Tools, what it is and how we can look at it now. So the Global Tools was an educational initiative founded between different cities of Italy, which consisted in several workshops between Milan, Naples, Padua, and Florence, of course. And the founder of initiatives, as Salvatore just said, were many groups coming from the radical architecture movement, and some independent important figures like Alessandro Mendini, who was at the time the editor of Casabella, and Riccardo D'Alisi in Naples, and Franco Raggi, an independent designer. The school, the idea of this counter school was an idea of, it was started in 1973, so it happened just after it was a kind of a reaction to the fact that after the 1968, in the academies, in the faculties of architecture, there was a sort of a return to order. So there was a return to order. So the idea was that the most avant-gardistic group should actually reunite and think about how, since it's not possible to have an innovation inside of the faculties, how we could create an autonomous pedagogical system outside of the faculties. And as I said, the idea was to kind of create, the school was supposed not to have a base, but to be diffused in different cities, and not to have a hierarchy, but to have several people actually collaborating on a different way of institutionalization. So the school should consist in 5 groups, which were body, which has a very strong impact from the visual arts and the body arts. Then there was a school with the topic of construction, which was actually based on the idea of the failure of construction itself. There was a group working on the topic of communication, a group working on the idea of survival, which was a very interesting, was a very important topic during the Cold War epoch and during the kind of the ecological crisis of the 70s. Then the last group was about theory, so how also theory could become a tool. And basically, the main atmosphere of the school was the idea that the kind of the modern tool, the tools that modernity gave us to kind of understand both the architectural environment, the city, and everything, are not enough good to face the current condition of crisis that in the 70s was happening. And so the idea was to kind of set a new landscape of tools to enhance the individual and the collective creativity. So that's more or less the background and how the experience was organized. The experience lasted for 2 years, no, 3 years, between 1975 and 1973 and 1975, and it actually happened. So there were some laboratories happening, even if everything was very ephemeral. So they didn't leave any kind of object of construction that we could actually see. But there is the documentation of what was happening. And actually the school at the end, but the school itself with the real students on a kind of a more formalized base, it actually never happened because the project dissolved in 1975. And it dissolved for different reasons. One was the fact that in a moment of lack of funding, there was an inability of how to organize. And the other reason was that actually, even though it was a collective project, there were a lot of very strong individualities. And so these individualities started to emerge as kind of singular projects. So this is more or less the main historical facts under that we can take as a base to start to reflect further on the sense of the experience.
Perfect. So this, what was the relationship between global tools and Italian experiences of autoformazione in the late 60s and the 70s? And there were connection with other international experiences of counterculture, and between the global tools and the political movement of the time about labor conditions.
Yeah, so regarding the other experiences of autoformazione in Italy, for example, the most famous of Giancarlo De Carlo, there were not direct connection. Of course, they knew each other, but we didn't find any connection, and the members of the Global Tools said that they were just different initiatives. But on the other side, the strongest connection were, as you said, with the other experiences of the counterculture all over the world. There was a very direct connection with America, with the United States, with several groups there, like, for example, the Site, the Five, but also Buckminster Fuller, and we found documents of connection with Peter Eisman and his school. So the idea was that the Global Tools Bulletins, which was the publication of Global Tools, was supposed also to be published in a magazine Opposition. And a part of the real connection, there was anyhow a very strong connection of influences that were coming from the United States. For example, the pedagogical experience of the Pacific High School, which was a counter-educational organization created in the state of California, where Buckminster Fuller, but also Ant Farm was teaching. This was, it was before Global Tools in the 60s, and this was a kind of a similar inspiration for them. Many of we can say that the whole atmosphere of this idea of doing things in the countryside, building shelters, this was really coming from this kind of aesthetic that was going on in the United States. Another figure which was very relevant for them was Papanek. Not so much because he didn't found any school, but he had this book, Design for the Real World, which was sort of a school itself. And his way of thinking and of diffusing information very relevant for them, and as well as the Warlord catalog. And indeed, in the book, we invited Simon Sadler, who is an historian of architecture, who wrote about situationism, to really compare what was the idea of the structure of the catalog for diffusing knowledge, and how was the global tools organized. So actually, these were more or less the connections with the international scene. And while speaking more about Italy, there was for sure a very, for who of you who don't know, Italy in the period of 70s was actually in a very different mood comparing to United States. We were in a period which was called later the Years of Lead, which was a period where the leftist movement, unfortunately, ended up in a moment of terrorism. So this was the kind of and there was a very contradictory fight between left and right wings in a very extreme way. So this was the political landscape under global tools. But there was a very vivid intellectual production, which was the one of the operaist philosophies and operaist theory, and this was very influential on them. And especially you can see it in the work of Archizum, because they were the one who left the more documents related on theory, which was coming from this movement. So, for example, this is very vivid and visible in two ideas, which was, first of all, the idea of refusing of labor, which they were applying actually in the global tools. So the idea that laziness could be a resource, and the strike is the most important moment of refusal of labor. And the other one was the topic of autonomy. So how do you create a kind of a institution which become autonomous from the main authoritarian discourse? And so I pretty much agree with the challenge that Pier Vittorio Aureli took when he wrote his book, The Project of Autonomy, when he tried to actually connect the thinking of Archizum and of Aldo Rossi with what was happening and with the thinking of Mario Tronti and so on. And I think that, I mean, it's not the connection, but still with challenges we're connecting. And anyway, there was not, but this connection we should always underline and make it clear that was a very intellectual connection. It was not, I mean, the Global Tools was not an initiative which was militant in terms of politics. The only militant architect was Paolo De Ganello, who was actually connected to the party. But so it's more in terms of the philosophy and the discourse that we could reconnect the experiences. Yeah.
Okay. The next question is we are interested in the question of radicality of the pedagogical experience. What was the meaning of this term radicality in the 70s, and now is possible to be radical? Is possible to see the radicality survives in these movements nowadays?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question to actually think about the notion of radicality. But historically, we know that the term radicality started to be used during the avant-garde of the beginning of the 20th century. Germano Celan defined the group of architects radical. But radical were not just the group of architects. It was a general attitude that in the 70s was, in the 60s, let's say in the late 60s, was going on. And it was an idea of breaking, radically breaking with the authoritarian institution, whether the institution was the school, or it was the state, or it was the idea of the family as an institution. So all these kind of values related to authoritarian thinking were broken. The point is that we saw how the history went, and we saw that the project of radicality that was fought in the 70s, it failed in a way. It failed because we see in the 80s with the postmodern society and the late capitalism, we see a return of order, and we see how Europe went through a period of normalization. So we are, I think, in a moment when the term radicality has still a lot of potential, and I believe in it, but we have to rethink about which kind of formats in nowadays radicality could appear. I like to think that how Franco Raggi said in one of the interviews we made with him about global tools, he said that for him, radicality is a mental attitude and is a way of using the resource difference and and a way that could be proactive in a situation of derive and of crisis. So I actually believe that this is how we should think about this term, and we should always try to find new ways of new format and new format which could actually work in the complex society where we are. And we should know more. I think that in the 70s, radicality was also a bit like black and white. It was like a very black and white way of breaking with the situation. And I think that we live in a too complex society to be to use such kind of binary categories. We should actually always try to create a more strategic and multiple idea of radicality. But yeah, again, I think that there's a lot of potential, and I believe that many interesting initiatives are actually going very radically. Yeah.
Just another question. Related to what you're saying about the new forms and new format of education, and new way of actions. Also, I would like you to ask another question. In which way this new format, these autonomous experiences, and all the experiences we can see nowadays have to deal with the institutionalized academies or with the institutionalized world? In which way? I mean, do we have to stay, not talking about global tools, but I mean, for example,
about now.
But in which way do we have to work with them? Do we have to stay in a border part? Do we have to work inside the institutions? Do we have to? I mean, this is a question we always ask to ourselves for our experience, for our work, because we don't know exactly how to work and how to deal with, how to manage the relationship with institutions and the classic and academies.
Yeah, sure. No, I understand your question very well, because it's true that unfortunately in Europe we found ourselves to be in a situation where we still have very old institutions which are very bureaucratic, and they apply incredibly static and old ideas of control over the education, and doesn't allow possibility of interdisciplinarity. So so that's the state of things. I believe that, but first of all, for sure, there is a very kind of carte blanche, like an empty space for us to create a new institution in which we can think about totally new ideas of institutionalization, which means organization of work, which means, and this is something that for sure it's a challenge. I'm now connected from Kiev, where I am speaking from the Visual Culture Research Center, which is, I think, an amazing example of how a group of people could think about creating a very horizontal way of working. So I believe that we have we are in a moment where we need to create new institutions, but also being European, where we still have to deal with the heritage of very important academic or cultural institution. For us, I think that the biggest challenge is actually how to being radical from the inside. So how to innovate from how to innovate the current institution. I think that there is actually space for every kind of initiatives, both the ones that are outside and both the ones that are within. For sure, I always believe that it's of course always more difficult to innovate from within than create something new. So that's a big challenge, but for sure it's something that if we want to if we want to see our universities to change, for sure we also need to think about not just moving out, but also step in with. And this, I said that is a challenge because it's actually what I think that the generation of the 70s failed to do. They actually thought about doing something else because they were not able to do something from the inside, and because no, actually they did something very strong from the inside, but then we saw a return of order. So yeah, that's a difficult task, but I think that it's rather interesting to think, because it's still a lot to do, how to integrate technologies, how to create interdisciplinary platforms, and I'm very interested to think about also how this could be done, not just outside, but also inside, or at least with a communication with the two parts. And yeah, and also if we think about, for example, the tools that we could use for how to, because I think this could be another question. So which are the tools that we could use, since the global tools had their tools, which are the tools that we could use in our contemporary society to deal with this, with these issues? And I think that for sure the technology, it's a tool, as we are doing now. So we have an incredible potentiality of connecting as we are doing, and this is something that you are wonderfully working on it with this project. And but I think that it's not just technology the only tool. We also think about a new way of working together, and especially as also Ivan Illich was telling in his book, which was called Tools for Conviviality. I think that it's also a tool. It's really also something about changing our attitude towards each other, and this is another tool of working, because this is also something that we saw how the previous generation failed, because if we look at the members of global tools, they now almost don't many of them, not all of them, but many of them don't respect each other anymore, and they're all very individual and selfish figures. So I think that also our idea of ourselves as individuals should be rediscussed, for the kind of create a new idea of collectivity.
You quoted Ivan Illich. So in the title of your forthcoming book, you said, you write, education will coincide with life, and this phrase sounds very familiar to our first statement of the Free University, that sounds like Free University as classroom as city itself. We learn where we immerse ourselves in the experience and reflection on what is around and involve us. We learn from the world and not acquiring information about it. Can you comment and explain better this concept, the schooling, the concept of Ivan Illich?
Yeah, sure. Something happened? No? We are still connected? Yeah, okay. I think that it's a very interesting dialectic to compare what was this idea for the epoch of the 70s and what we are doing nowadays. We choose this title of Global Tools for our upcoming publication because this is a phrase which we found in one of the documents and was written by Adolfo Natalini, one of the members of the Super Studio. And he was meaning with that every kind of activity of the humankind, it's enough, it has enough dignity to be inserted within the kind of disciplines that the school should engage with. So he was saying that, for example, we need to teach agriculture to learn how to build. So we need to have dances classes, film school, how to make books by ourselves. So every kind of do-it-yourself activity has the same dignity as theory or more theoretical thinking. And of course, I mean, the idea of bridging art and life, it's something which is coming from the avant-garde. So we should not trace it as an idea of the Ivan Illich or the 70s. This is something that already you could see on the schools of the 20s, like the Hutmas or other experiences which were merging the teaching of architecture with the other kind of fields of life. In the 70s and in Global Tools, this idea is very important because we see how the radical architecture made a step towards, before they were really focused on the idea of the city. So the city as a kind of the main platform on which you should operate. And with the Global Tools was really the moment in which they shifted from the city to the idea of the habitat. And then later it came the design. So how we have, in a moment of environmental crisis and of political crisis, how we should perceive the entire scale of our habitats into our discipline of architecture, because they were at the moment thinking about it. So not just the city, but the habitat itself. And but I found it poetic how, anyway, in your idea of course, yeah, I mean, I found poetic the fact that something which was maybe not very present in their, yeah? Okay, sure. I close the space. In the 70s, there was not, I mean, at least in the Global Tools, apart from the experience of Riccardo D'Alisi, which was working with the children of Rione Traiano. So this, on the other scale, there was not enough of society inside of the school. And this is maybe why also one of the reasons. I mean, it was, at the end, the school was closed for the people who were close to design, to architecture, while I like a lot that the initiative of the Free University is something that actually emerges from the city and the urban problematics, and everyone could be engaged, and every kind of problematic become then the disciplines of the school, and the people become teachers. So I think that you're doing this integration between life and education, it's in a way much more sustainable than it was doing before. And I think that this is a very valuable thing in the project. And it's of course something that in the main institution doesn't happen. So I think that even if we saw a lot of experiences in that sense, I think there is still many of these experiences sometimes remain at the status of programs, and it's very important to keep trying to make it more real, this integration. Yeah.
And just another question to finish, which is a more generic question. Talking about nowadays and the last years, we have seen arising a lot of new autonomous pedagogical experiences. What? Okay. And why do you think there is? I mean, why all these experiences are burning in the last years? Do you think that there is a lack from the institutions about the educational system? There's a I don't know. It is something I understand. It is something difficult, but why all these new experiences about autonomous pedagogical experiences, and there should be a problem. I mean, there should be a problem from the institutional world, from the institutional academic world.
Yeah.
And, why? What do you think about it? What do you think about all the presence of these experiences?
Yeah, sure. I think that, as Edith Rogov said, she kind of was the one who defined the temporality of this phenomena of emerging of because we saw pedagogical experiences emerging since, as we said, since 70s until nowadays. But after 2008, which was the moment of the signing of the Bologna Accord, actually these experiences have raised, and we have much more. I think that this experiences actually face or wants to respond to some major problems that are undergoing in the field of education. One is that, as we said before, in the kind of old academies, we saw a kind of a return to this idea, I mean, of the disciplinary society. Even so, all over the world, we are going in another direction, but in this kind of institution, we saw how they use technology, not as a way to emancipate, but as a way of controlling the number of students that are going, and disciplines are still stuck, and these academies are not able to innovate. On the completely other side, in the field of the kind of the neoliberal education and the private education, we have seen how the prices have raised in the recent years, especially in UK. But then this was a trend all over Europe. So we have all these very expensive educational programs in the field of arts, design, architecture, or humanities in general, that actually they are very expensive, and that's the most difficult things is that they are promising us with an idea of job into the creative industries that actually doesn't exist, because we are in a moment of a very deep crisis of precarity. So I think that we stay in this in between very bureaucratic state institution and very tricky neoliberal situation with education. And so we saw the emergence of many initiatives that I found, many of them absolutely imaginative and great, as if we think of the silent universities or all the experimentation of the works of Adelita Husni-Bey, whom you may have spoken this morning, and many other art institutions who actually. And as we were speaking in previous conversation, I was what I find curious is how much we are also revisiting the experiences of the 70s. Me first with the global tools, but many other people, we are actually using a bibliography from the 70s instead of using, I mean, now we are also rewriting a new bibliography about what is going on, but our inspirations come exactly from the period. And I was reflecting on it, and I think that one of the main reasons, it's maybe because many of the initiatives of the 70s actually never actualized. They never really existed. Like they stayed in theory, or even they failed to exist, or as once Kolas told when we were studying at the Strelka, that was a program in Moscow that he ran just for 2 years. When he decided to go away, he said that the best educational experiences, they last just for a few times, and then they die, because they die before becoming a real institution. And I think that our contemporary way of thinking, our contemporary times, is so much, we live so much about these kind of dreams and potentialities which never actualized, and that's why they are so precious for us. And another thing is that I think that there were, even though many of these experiences failed, they had a very always original idea of how to institutionalize and how to self-organize. And this, I think, it's an important reference for us, even if we now have completely new tools and we can imagine completely new structure. But still, I think that they left a lot of good heritage about it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. But we don't have it. But we don't have any other questions. And just to add something, I completely agree with you when you say that one of the reasons that is at the base of the failure of the movements of the 60s, of the experiences of the 60s, is that I think they remained in a world too theoretical. Maybe they didn't actualize their thoughts, their reasonings, and this is why they not connecting their experience, their action, their thinking to humanity. I think this is the reason why they failed, because at the end I think we can say that they failed in their task. Well, I mean,
it's not a failure, but
it's not a failure. Okay, we can't say that it's a failure because we are talking about them. They left us a lot of informations, reasonings, and experiences, but they, for example, global tools existed for just 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah, but they speak about themselves. I agree that it's a wrong terms for us to use, because actually that was a period where they changed our society in a way that maybe not in an institutional way, but in a way they did, and we are very grateful to that, and we are quoting them all the time for that. But anyway, I think they failed institutionally. That was what they did. They didn't. They were not able to reorganize in a way that they were too theoretical and maybe also too closed, as we said. Yeah, they didn't open up to society, and also there were some kind of, they were all men at the time. I mean that's not in a way to say again men and women, but it was a kind of a very homogeneous group. They were all men, they were all Italian, they were all, and of course this cannot work anymore, and that's and there were a lot of, and also there was a lot of ego, and I think that this is something. These are all the categories which we should try to reinvent and work differently, as actually you are doing very, very successfully in these projects. And I believe, that we are also a lot of professionals nowadays, and all in the same kind of situation. So we should try to, as exactly you are doing, not to do closed projects, but to build platforms, which gives also the possibility of people to step in any moment, and not to close the collectives. Because if you look at the Global Tools Bulletins, they really had the biography of everyone. I mean, the group at the end was very stable since the beginning, and I think that it's very precious to have a very kind of open borders to these initiatives, to allow energies to come in, people who doesn't want to step out, and actually being, as you do, more permeable to the society, more open. Yeah.
Perfect.
Good.
Silvia, we thank you very much for your presence, for your contribution. We don't have any more questions.
I think, good. Thanks a lot to you. That's it's a brilliant program. So I will connect now to hear the new speakers which are coming up.
Okay, we're going to speak, just a little advice. We are going to speak at
5:30.
At half past five with the University of London.
Fantastic.
This is the next meeting. Thank you again.
Okay, good. See you at 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Ciao.
Ciao Silvia.
Ciao ragazzi. Ciao ciao.